They say burning alive is quick. They're lying. It stretches. Every second feels like an eternity of searing pain before the smoke takes you. Loretta thought she was just saving a trapped child from a blazing brownstone. She didn't know that the boy paralyzed behind those flames was the son of Alex Esposito, the most feared man in New York's underworld. She didn't know that running into that fire would pull her into a world of ashes, million-dollar blood debts, and a man who could raise the entire city for his child. She saved the boy's life, but she was about to find out that might have been her fatal mistake. The heat hit Loretta like a physical blow before she even reached the door. It wasn't the friendly crackle of a fireplace or the controlled flame of a kitchen stove. This was something primal, a roaring beast that breathed sulfur and rage, consuming everything in its path. Black smoke poured from the second-floor windows of the brownstone, curling into the sweltering July sky like dark fingers reaching for escape. The crowd gathering on the sidewalk had their phones out, recording, always recording, never helping. Loretta's fingers tightened around the crumpled bills in her pocket, tonight's tips from her double shift at the diner. Her feet should have kept moving. She should have walked past like everyone else, called 911, waited for the professionals. But then she saw the window. Ground floor. The one she passed every single day. The one where a boy in a wheelchair always sat, his small hand lifting in a wave that she'd returned for months without ever learning his name. The window was dark now. No movement, no wave. The sirens were still blocks away. Loretta dropped her purse and ran. Tell me in the comments before we begin where you are listening from. I'm responding to everyone. The fluorescent lights were too bright. That was Loretta's first coherent thought as consciousness dragged her back from the dark. Her second thought was that her lungs felt like someone had scrubbed them with steel wool and gasoline. She tried to sit up, but a hand pressed firmly against her shoulder. Easy there, hero. The voice belonged to a nurse whose face swam into focus, round, kind, exhausted. You've got smoke inhalation. Your oxygen levels were critically low when they brought you in. Loretta's throat burned as she tried to speak. The boy, don't talk yet. You need to rest. But Loretta couldn't rest. The images were flooding back now, the foyer door splintering under her kicks, the wall of heat that had nearly stopped her heart, crawling on her belly beneath the smoke. Finding him trapped under a fallen bookshelf, his thin legs useless beneath him, his eyes wide with the kind of terror that no child should ever know. She'd pulled him free. She remembered the weight of him in her arms, lighter than he should have been, as if fear had hollowed him out. She remembered stumbling through the smoke, her vision narrowing to a pinpoint, and then the cool shock of night air and strong hands taking the boy from her arms. Then nothing. The boy, Loretta rasped again, her voice like gravel. Is he okay? They got him out, right? The nurse's expression shifted, something that might have been confusion or concern. Let me get the doctor. 20 minutes later, Loretta found herself staring at two NYPD officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The older one, Detective Morris, had the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much and believed too little. His partner, a younger woman named Chen, stood by the door with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Miss Marino, Morris said, flipping open a notebook that had seen better days. We need to ask you some questions about tonight. I need to know if the boy is okay first. Morris exchanged a glance with his partner. What boy? The steel wool feeling in Loretta's lungs got worse. The boy from the apartment. Ground floor. He was in a wheelchair, paralyzed. I pulled him out. Miss Marino. Morris's voice had gone carefully neutral. at the tone of someone talking to a confused child or a potential mental patient. The building was empty. It's been condemned for 3 months. Squatters sometimes break in, but there was no one inside tonight. That's not true. Loretta tried to sit up straighter, ignoring the oxygen tube pulling at her nose. I saw him every day. He lived there. He waved at me from his window. There's no record of anyone living in that building, Chen cut in, her voice crisp. No utilities, no lease agreements, no tenant registry, nothing. Then check the hospital records. He would have been brought in. Smoke inhalation, maybe burns. We checked. Morris closed his notebook with a finality that made Loretta's stomach drop. No child matching that description was admitted to any hospital in the tri-state area tonight, but no child was pulled from that fire, except in your statement. The room felt like it was tilting. But I carried him out. The firefighters took him from me. The firefighters say you stumbled out of the building alone and collapsed. Morris's expression had shifted from neutral to something that looked almost pitying. You were severely oxygen deprived, Miss Marino. Smoke inhalation can cause hallucinations, false memories. The mind tries to make sense of trauma. I didn't hallucinate a 30-pound child. Loretta's voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. I felt his weight. I felt his arms around my neck. He was real. Chen stepped forward, her hand resting on the rail of the hospital bed. Miss Marino, we understand you've been through something traumatic, but we need you to understand something too. That building was empty. There was no boy, and if you keep insisting there was, we're going to have to consider that you might be experiencing a psychiatric episode. The implication hung in the air like smoke. If she kept pushing, they'd label her unstable. They'd make this her problem instead of their mystery. Morris pulled out a card and set it on the bedside table. If you remember anything else, anything real, give us a call. For now, get some rest. And Miss Marino? He paused at the door. Maybe think twice before running into burning buildings. Heroics are for people with training and insurance. They left her there, alone with the beeping monitors and the fluorescent lights, and the absolutely certainty that she had not imagined the weight of a child in her arms, or the fear in his dark eyes. Someone was lying, and Loretta had a sinking feeling that finding out why might burn her worse than the fire had. Loretta was back at work 3 days later because her mother's medication didn't pay for itself, and the hospital bill certainly wasn't going to disappear through wishful thinking. The Starlight Diner on Amsterdam Avenue wasn't much. Cracked vinyl booths, a perpetually broken milkshake machine, and a cook named Jimmy who chain-smoked between orders. But it kept the lights on. Loretta had worked the morning shift, gone home to check on her mother, then come back for the dinner rush. Her lungs still ached with every deep breath, a constant reminder that everyone thought she was crazy. She was refilling coffee for a regular when the bell above the door chimed. The man who walked in didn't belong in the Starlight Diner. So that was Loretta's first thought. He wore a suit that probably cost more than her annual rent. Charcoal grey, perfectly tailored, the kind of craftsmanship that whispered old money and new violence. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from Roman marble, all sharp angles and cold authority. But it was his eyes that made Loretta's hand freeze over the coffee pot. They were the colour of storm clouds, and they were looking directly at her. 2 men followed him in, broad-shouldered and alert in a way that screamed private security. One moved to the door and flipped the sign to "Closed." The other took up position by the kitchen. "Hey!" Jimmy shouted from behind the counter. "We don't close for another—" The man in the suit pulled out a wallet and placed $500 bills on the counter without looking at Jimmy. "You do now?" Jimmy looked at the money, then at Loretta. then grabbed the bills and disappeared into the back. The handful of customers didn't need to be told twice. They scattered like rats from a sinking ship, leaving their half-eaten meals and Loretta alone with her coffee pot and her suddenly thundering heart. The man approached her booth with the kind of measured stride that suggested he'd never hurried for anything in his life. Up close, she could see the faint shadow of a tattoo creeping up from his collar. Something dark and intricate that his expensive suit couldn't quite hide. Loretta Marino. His voice was deep, controlled, and with the faintest trace of an accent that money and education had tried to erase. Sit. It wasn't a request. Loretta's fingers tightened on the coffee pot. I'm working. Not anymore. Sit down, Miss Marino, or I'll have Marco carry you to the booth. Your choice. The man by the door, Marco, apparently, cracked his knuckles. Loretta sat. The man slid into the booth across from her, with the fluid grace of a predator, settling in for a meal. He studied her for a long moment, those storm cloud eyes taking in her faded uniform, the shadows under her eyes, the bandage still visible on her left arm from where falling debris had caught her. My name is Alessandro Esposito, he said finally, though most people call me Alex. And before you pretend you don't know who I am, let me save us both the time. You've heard the name, and you know what it means. Loretta had heard the name. Everyone in New York had heard the name. The Esposito family controlled everything from the docks to the Diamond District. They were the monsters parents whispered about, the reason certain streets went quiet after dark, the shadow government that operated while the real government looked the other way. I don't want any trouble, Loretta said quietly. Too late for that. Alex leaned back, and the gesture was somehow more threatening than if he'd leaned forward. You ran into a burning building 3 nights ago. You saved a boy, a paralyzed boy that the police insist doesn't exist. Loretta's breath caught. That boy is my son. Luca! Alex's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been pain in a man capable of feeling it. He's 8 years old. He's been in a wheelchair since he was 5, courtesy of a car bomb meant for me. I keep him hidden, Miss Marino. Protected. Anonymous. Because in my world, children are leverage, and leverage gets people killed. The fire was an assassination attempt. Alex's voice went cold enough to frost the windows. Someone found out where I was keeping him. Someone tried to burn my son alive. And you, a waitress working double shifts to afford her mother's heart medication, ran into the flames and carried him out. Loretta's mind was reeling. How do you know about my mother? I know everything about you, Miss Marino. I know you're 26 years old. I know you dropped out of nursing school when your mother got sick. I know you take the express bus home because you're afraid of the subway at night. I know you've been eating ramen for a week because you're behind on bills. He paused. I also know that my son spoke to you. He didn't say anything. Exactly. Alex leaned forward now, and Loretta saw something in his face that looked almost human. Luca hasn't spoken since the bombing. Selective mutism, the doctors call it. But in the hospital, while you were unconscious and he was being checked over, he asked the nurse if the pretty lady who smells like cinnamon was okay. Those were the first words he's spoken in 3 years. Loretta couldn't breathe. The weight of what he was saying pressed down on her chest, worse than the smoke had. I need someone to take care of my son, Alex said. Someone he trusts. Someone brave enough to run into fire for a child she's never even met. And someone who can't be bought by my enemies because... He gestured at the diner around them. You're already surviving on nothing. I'm not a babysitter for the mob. No. Alex smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Loretta had ever seen. "You're going to be much more than that. You're going to live in my home, care for my son, keep him safe. And in return, I'll pay off your mother's medical bills, give you a salary that will make your diner wages look like pocket change, and ensure that no one ever threatens you or your family again. And if I say no?" Alex stood, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision. "Then I walk out that door, and you go back to your coffee pot and your ramen dinners. But understand this, Miss Marino. Someone tried to kill my son once. They'll try again. And the next time there's a fire, I won't be there to make sure there's someone brave enough or foolish enough to run inside." He placed a business card on the table. "You have 24 hours to decide. Choose wisely." He was gone before Loretta could find her voice, his security detail melting out the door behind him like shadows at dawn. Loretta sat alone in the empty diner, staring at the card. Embossed letters, a phone number. No address, because men like Alessandro Esposito didn't need to advertise where they lived. Her hands were shaking. She had 24 hours to decide if she was going to walk into another kind of fire entirely. The car that picked up Loretta wasn't what she expected. She'd imagined something ostentatious, a stretch limousine with tinted windows and chrome accents. Instead, a sleek black sedan pulled up to her mother's apartment building at exactly 8 in the morning, so understated it could have belonged to any corporate executive. Except corporate executives didn't usually employ drivers who checked their shoulder holsters before opening the passenger door. Her mother had cried when Loretta explained where she was going. Not the full truth, never the full truth, but enough. A private care position for a wealthy family. Live-in. Excellent pay. Her mother's medications were already paid for, transferred into her account by someone with enough power to make hospital billing departments move at supernatural speed. "Be careful, baby," her mother had whispered, clutching Loretta's hands with fingers made fragile by illness. Rich people don't give away money for nothing. Loretta knew that, or she just didn't know yet what the real price would be. The drive took 40 minutes, leaving Manhattan behind for the manicured wealth of Westchester County. They turned off the main road onto a private drive, flanked by iron gates that rolled open silently. Operated by guards Loretta couldn't see but knew were watching. The driveway curved through perfectly maintained grounds, ancient oaks, sculptured hedges, a fountain that looked like it had been imported from a Venetian palazzo. Then the house came into view, and Loretta understood that calling it a house was like calling the ocean a puddle. The Esposito estate was a fortress disguised as old money architecture. 3 stories of grey stone and tall windows, with wings that stretched out like protective arms. Security cameras tracked their approach from discreet mountings, or more guards, these ones visible, patrolled the perimeter with the disciplined spacing of military personnel. The message was clear. Nothing got in or out of here without Alessandro Esposito's permission. The car stopped at the front entrance. The driver opened her door without a word, and Loretta stepped out into air that smelled like cut grass and money, and something else she couldn't quite name. Danger, maybe. Or just the particular scent of a place where normal rules didn't apply. The front door opened before she could knock. Alex stood framed in the doorway, and the sight of him stole the breath from Loretta's lungs all over again. He wore another immaculate suit, navy this time, with a white shirt open at the collar. But it was what she could see at that open collar that caught her attention. The tattoo she'd glimpsed in the diner continued up his neck, dark lines that suggested something larger, more intricate, hidden beneath the civilized veneer of expensive fabric. A saint, maybe, or a demon. She couldn't tell which. "Miss Marino." He stepped aside. "Welcome." The interior of the house matched the exterior's promise of cold perfection. The foyer was all marble floors and soaring ceilings, a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than her mother's apartment building. Everything was pristine, coordinated, absolutely sterile. It looked like a museum after hours, beautiful and untouched and completely devoid of warmth. A woman appeared from a side hallway, older, severe, with silver hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. "This is Mrs. Chen," Alex said. "She manages the household staff. She'll show you to your quarters. First, you should meet Luca." Alex's tone shifted slightly, and Loretta caught something in his expression that might have been vulnerability in a man capable of showing it. "He's been asking about you." They walked through hallways lined with art that Loretta suspected was original, a Modigliani here, what might have been a Caravaggio there. More security cameras tracked their progress. They passed closed doors behind which Loretta heard voices, the tap of computer keyboards, the kind of white noise that suggested this house was more than a home. It was a headquarters. Alex stopped at a door on the second floor and knocked, actually knocked, which surprised her. "Luca, your new friend is here." The room beyond was different from the rest of the house. Where everything else was cold and coordinated, this space exploded with color. Drawings covered the walls, crayon and marker and paint, chaotic and vivid. Toys scattered across the floor. A large window overlooked the gardens, letting in actual sunlight. And in the center of it all, in a wheelchair positioned by a low table covered in art supplies, sat the boy. Luca looked up, and his face transformed. He was small for 8, with Alex's dark hair and eyes that held too much knowledge for a child. The wheelchair was top-of-the-line medical equipment, all chrome and careful engineering. But his smile was pure and uncomplicated, and aimed directly at Loretta like a beam of light. "You came," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking was something he had to consciously remember how to do. "Oh, I thought maybe I dreamed you." Loretta crossed the room and knelt beside his wheelchair, ignoring the way her still healing lungs protested. "I'm real, and I'm here now." "Because of me?" Luca's expression turned uncertain. "Papa said you're going to stay because of me." "Because of you," Loretta confirmed, and reached out to gently squeeze his hand. His fingers were thin, cool, but they held onto hers with surprising strength. Behind her, she heard Alex make a sound, something caught between relief and something darker. When she glanced back, she saw him standing in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. The tattoo was more visible now, curling up from his collar. She could make out wings, the suggestion of a blade, script in a language she didn't recognize. A savage history written on skin that expensive suits tried to erase, but never quite could. He caught her looking and didn't look away. "Mrs. Chen will show you the rest of the house," Alex said, his voice carefully controlled again. "Luca has physical therapy in an hour. You'll observe today. Tomorrow, you'll take over his daily routine." "His mother," Loretta started, "is dead." The words were flat, final, allowing no follow-up questions. "It's just us now." Alex left without another word, and Loretta heard his footsteps echo down the hallway like a countdown. She looked around at the colorful chaos of Luca's room, so different from the sterile perfection of the rest of the fortress, and wondered if this was the only place in the entire estate where anything was allowed to be messy or human or real. "Do you like drawing?" Luca asked, tugging at her hand. Loretta smiled, pushing down the unease that crawled up her spine. "I love drawing." "Good." Luca pulled her toward the art table. "Because Papa can't draw at all. His people are always shaped like potatoes. And despite everything, The guards, the cameras, the fortress walls, the dangerous man with salvation and damnation written on his skin. Loretta laughed. Maybe, she thought, she could survive this after all. The physical therapist arrived at precisely 10 o'clock, wheeling an equipment that looked more like medieval torture devices than medical tools. Her name was Dr. Reeves, and she had the kind of professionally cheerful demeanor that Loretta recognized from her own truncated nursing school days, the voice people used when they'd learned to smile through other people's pain. Luca's face shut down the moment she entered. "Good morning, Luca." Dr. Reeves's brightness could have powered the entire estate. "Ready to work on those leg exercises?" Luca stared at the wall. "Luca, we talked about this. If you want to get stronger, you have to." "He said he doesn't want to." Loretta hadn't meant to interrupt, but the words came out before she could stop them. Dr. Reeves turned, her smile acquiring a sharp edge. "And you are?" "Loretta Marino. I'm Luca's new caretaker." "I see." The smile didn't reach Dr. Reeves's eyes. "Well, Miss Marino, and Luca has a very specific therapeutic protocol that's been designed by specialists. He needs to maintain muscle tone and joint flexibility, even if he's not particularly enthusiastic about it." "I'm not doing it," Luca said, his voice small but defiant. The session devolved from there. Dr. Reeves tried encouragement, then gentle insistence, then barely concealed frustration. Luca sat in his wheelchair like a stone statue, refusing to cooperate with stretches or exercises, or even basic range of motion work. After 45 agonizing minutes, Dr. Reeves packed up her equipment with movements sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Esposito will hear about this," she said, directing the comment at Luca, but clearly meaning it for Loretta. This is the third session he's refused to participate in. After she left, Loretta pulled a chair over to face Luca's wheelchair. "Want to tell me what that was about?" Luca's jaw was set in a way that reminded her painfully of his father. "It hurts. I know. She says it's supposed to hurt, that it means it's working." His eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. "But it never works. I never get better. So why does it have to hurt?" Loretta's chest ached. "Because life isn't fair. Because you're 8, and you've already learned that effort doesn't always equal reward. Because your father's enemies took your legs, and no amount of physical therapy will ever give them back." But she didn't say any of that. "What if we tried something different?" Loretta said instead. "Something that's not about getting better, just about feeling better?" Luca looked at her with cautious hope. "Or like what? Do you like music?" 20 minutes later, Loretta had convinced Mrs. Chen to let them use the kitchen. The housekeeper had been horrified at first. Mr. Esposito's son did not belong among the pots and pans, but something in Loretta's expression must have convinced her to allow it. The kitchen was massive, all commercial-grade appliances and granite counters, clearly designed for catering large events rather than family dinners. Loretta suspected most of the equipment had never been used. She found what she needed anyway: flour, sugar, eggs, vanilla. The basics for chocolate chip cookies, the universal language of childhood comfort. She lifted Luca from his wheelchair and settled him on a stool at the counter, positioning him so he could reach the mixing bowl. Then she pulled out her phone and scrolled through her playlist until she found it. Old Motown, the kind of music her mother used to play on Sunday mornings when the world felt manageable. "Okay," Loretta said, as Marvin Gaye's voice filled the kitchen. "Your job is to mix. My job is to make sure we don't burn the place down. Deal?" Luca's hands hesitated over the bowl, then plunged in. Flour puffed up in a cloud that dusted his dark hair white. He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was better than anything Loretta had heard since arriving at the fortress. They mixed and measured, and Loretta taught him the trick her mother had taught her. Always save a little dough to eat raw, consequences be damned. Luca's face when he tasted it was pure joy. Chocolate chips smeared at the corner of his mouth. "Oh, this is better than therapy," he said. "Don't tell Dr. Reeves that." They were sliding the first tray into the oven when Loretta felt the prickle of awareness at the back of her neck. She turned and found Alex standing in the doorway. So still, he might have been carved from the same stone as his house. How long had he been watching? He'd shed his suit jacket, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing more of the tattoos that covered his forearms. Loretta could see them clearly now, saints and sinners intertwined, Latin script winding between images of damnation and salvation. One forearm bore what looked like the Madonna, the other a skull crowned in thorns. A man caught between heaven and hell, wearing his war on his skin. "Papa!" Luca's face lit up. "Guys, we're making cookies." "I can see that." Alex's voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes were locked on Loretta with an intensity that made her skin feel too warm. "Mrs. Chen informed me you'd commandeered her kitchen." "I'm sorry, I should have asked." "Don't apologize." Alex moved into the kitchen with that predator's grace, coming to stand beside his son. He reached out and gently brushed the flour from Luca's hair, and the gesture was so tender it made Loretta's throat tight. Dr. Reeves called. She said Luca refused therapy again. The warmth drained from the room. "It's my fault," Loretta said quickly. "I should have encouraged him to—" "She also said," Alex continued, his gaze shifting from Luca to her, "that in the 5 minutes after you spoke to him, he was more responsive than he'd been in the last 3 sessions combined." He paused. "She recommended I fire her and hire you instead." Loretta blinked. "What?" "I told her that wasn't possible, since you're not a licensed physical therapist." Alex's expression remained unreadable. "But I also told her that her services were no longer required. You'll coordinate Luca's care going forward. Do what works. Clearly you have better instincts than the specialists I've been paying." "I don't have any medical training." "You have something better." Alex looked at his son, and something in his face cracked, just for a moment, just enough for Loretta to glimpse the man beneath the monster. "You have what he needs." The timer went off, shrill in the sudden silence. Loretta pulled the cookies from the oven, golden and perfect, and filling the sterile kitchen with the smell of home. She plated 3 of them, sliding one toward Luca, one toward Alex, and keeping one for herself. "You have to try them while they're hot," she said. "That's the rule." Luca bit into his immediately, making happy sounds that brought the ghost of a smile to Alex's face. The mob boss picked up his cookie like it might explode, studying it with the same intensity he'd probably applied to $1 million deals and execution orders. Then he took a bite. Loretta watched something shift in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or the distant memory of something like normalcy. He finished the entire cookie in silence, and when he looked at her again, the ice in his eyes had thawed just enough to let her see the storm beneath. "You're good for him," Alex said quietly, meant only for her, while Luca reached for a second cookie. "Don't make me regret bringing you here." It wasn't a threat. Not exactly. But it wasn't not a threat either. "I won't," Loretta said, and hoped it was a promise she could keep. Alex left them there in the warm kitchen, and Loretta watched him go, noticing the way his shoulders carried weight that no expensive suit could hide. A father terrified of failing his son. A king afraid his crown was made of ashes. She was beginning to understand that the real fortress wasn't the house, or the guards, or the walls. It was the man himself. And she'd just been given the keys. If you are still listening now, I need you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Your subscription means a lot to me, more than you know. Thank you, stranger. But Loretta had been living in the fortress for 2 weeks when Mrs. Chen asked her to help with the laundry. The regular girl called in sick, the housekeeper said, her tone suggesting that calling in sick was a moral failing. Mr. Esposito's men leave their jackets in the mudroom after patrol. They need to be cleaned and returned by tonight. It wasn't technically part of Loretta's job description, but she'd learned quickly that the Esposito household operated on an unspoken hierarchy, and new arrivals didn't say no to Mrs. Chen. Besides, Luca was napping after an exhausting morning of what Loretta had started calling kitchen therapy, teaching him to knead bread dough, which worked his hand muscles better than any exercise ball while making him laugh at the squelching sounds. The mudroom was off the kitchen, a utilitarian space that smelled like gun oil and expensive cologne. 5 black jackets hung on hooks, identical except for size. Loretta gathered them up and carried them to the laundry room, a space so well equipped it could have serviced a small hotel. She went through the pockets mechanically, the way her mother had taught her, checking for tissues that would destroy a load, receipts that shouldn't be washed, the small, forgotten items that accumulated in men's pockets. The first jacket yielded a stick of gum and spare ammunition. The second held a folded $20 bill. The third was empty. The 4th jacket belonged to Marco. She knew it was his because she'd seen him wearing it that morning, standing post outside Luca's door while she and the boy worked on a puzzle. Marco was Alex's right-hand man, of the one who'd cracked his knuckles at the diner, the one who seemed to materialize whenever Alex needed something handled. He was broad-shouldered and efficient, with the kind of face that disappeared from memory the moment he left a room, useful in his line of work. Loretta's fingers found something hard and metallic in the inside pocket. She pulled out a Zippo lighter, heavy and well used, the chrome finish worn at the edges from years of handling. It was engraved with something. She tilted it toward the light and made out a wolf's head, crude but distinctive, the kind of personal item a man carried for years, maybe decades. She shouldn't have opened it. She knew that, even as her thumb flicked the top. The smell hit her immediately, sharp, chemical, unmistakable. Not lighter fluid, accelerant, or the same smell that had filled her nose and lungs as she'd crawled through the burning brownstone, the scent that still sometimes woke her at 3 in the morning, gasping. Loretta's hands started shaking. She closed the lighter carefully and stood there in the laundry room, her heart hammering against her ribs. There could be innocent explanations. Maybe Marco smoked. Maybe the lighter was old and the fuel had degraded. Maybe she was paranoid, seeing threats where there were none, because she was living in a house full of dangerous men and her nerves were shot. But she kept seeing the brownstone engulfed in flames, kept feeling the heat that had nearly stopped her heart, kept remembering Luca's terrified eyes as she'd pulled him from beneath that fallen bookshelf. "Someone found out where I was keeping him," Alex had said, "'cause someone tried to burn my son alive." Loretta's nursing school instincts kicked in, the same instincts that had made her decent at triage, at separating genuine emergencies from false alarms. She needed more information. She needed to be sure before she accused Alex's most trusted man of trying to murder his child. She took out her phone and photographed the lighter from every angle, capturing the wolf's head engraving, the worn finish, the distinctive markings. Then she opened it again and photographed the inside mechanism, the fuel chamber, everything. Her hands were steadier now, moving with purpose. The sound of footsteps in the hallway froze her mid-shot. Loretta shoved the lighter back into Marco's jacket pocket and grabbed a random shirt from the pile, pretending to examine a stain as the laundry room door opened. DeMarco filled the doorway, his expression pleasant and utterly unreadable. "Mrs. Chen said you were doing laundry. I need my jacket back. Mr. Esposito wants me to drive into the city." "Of course." Loretta's voice came out steadier than she felt. She pulled his jacket from the pile and held it out. "I haven't washed it yet. Was just checking the pockets. Find anything interesting?" The question was casual, but his eyes weren't. Gum wrapper in one of them, ammunition in another. She met his gaze directly, willing herself not to look away. "You guys should really empty your pockets before you hand over the jackets." Marco took the jacket and shrugged it on with practiced ease. His hand went automatically to the inside pocket, patting it once, checking that the lighter was still there. The gesture was unconscious, habitual, of the kind of thing a man did 100 times a day without thinking. He knew exactly where it was. He always knew where it was. "Good advice," Marco said, and smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks for the help, Miss Marino. Mr. Esposito appreciates how well you're taking care of his son." He left, and Loretta listened to his footsteps recede down the hallway. She counted to 60, then 90, making sure he was really gone. Then she locked the laundry room door and pulled out her phone with shaking hands. The photos were clear, detailed, damning. She opened a new note and started typing everything she could remember about the fire, the smell, the heat, the specific way the flames had spread. The brownstone had burned fast, too fast for a normal electrical fire or even a careless cigarette. She'd thought it at the time, but hadn't had the vocabulary to explain it. Now she did. Accelerant, professional arson, an inside job. Marco had access to Luca's location. Marco had been with Alex for years, trusted completely. Marco could move through the house without anyone questioning his presence. Marco had tried to kill an 8-year-old boy, and now Loretta was living in the same house as him, caring for the child he'd already tried to murder once. She thought about going to Alex immediately, showing him the photos, demanding Marco be arrested or disappeared or whatever it was mob bosses did with traitors. But something stopped her. She'd been here 2 weeks. Marco had been here for years. Who would Alex believe? His most trusted lieutenant or the waitress he'd hired because his son liked the way she smelled like cinnamon? Oh, she needed more than a lighter and a suspicion. She needed proof. That would be undeniable. Loretta finished the laundry on autopilot, her mind racing through possibilities and plans. She returned the jackets to the mudroom, Marco's hanging exactly where she'd found it, the lighter still in the pocket like a ticking bomb. That night, she lay awake in her comfortable bedroom in the fortress, listening to the sounds of guards changing shifts outside her window. Somewhere down the hall, Luca slept peacefully, probably dreaming of cookies and finger paints and all the normal childhood things he'd been denied. And somewhere else in this massive house, Marco slept too. The enemy wasn't at the gates. He was already inside. Loretta stared at the ceiling until dawn, the smell of accelerant still burning in her memory, and wondered how long she had before the monster struck again. Loretta waited until Luca was asleep before she went looking for Alex. She found him in his office on the 3rd floor, a room she'd only glimpsed in passing. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and windows that overlooked the estate like a watchtower. The door was ajar, and through it she could see him sitting behind a massive desk, shirt sleeves rolled up, those tattooed forearms braced on either side of an open laptop. He looked exhausted in a way that expensive suits usually hid. Loretta knocked, and his head snapped up with the alertness of a man who'd survived by never being caught off guard. "Miss Marino." His expression shifted from dangerous to merely guarded. "Is Luca all right?" "He's fine." "Sleeping?" She stepped into the office before she could lose her nerve. "I need to talk to you about something." Alex gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk, but Loretta remained standing. Sitting felt like surrender, and she needed whatever advantage height could give her, minimal as it was. "I found something," she said, pulling out her phone. "In Marco's jacket, when I was doing laundry." Something flickered across Alex's face. Annoyance, maybe, that she was bothering him with household minutiae. And Loretta pulled up the photos and held out her phone. A lighter, with accelerant residue, the same smell from the fire. Alex took the phone, his expression unreadable as he scrolled through the images. The silence stretched long enough that Loretta could hear her own heartbeat, or could hear the ancient clock on the mantel, ticking away seconds that felt like hours. Then he handed the phone back. "Marco smokes," Alex said, his tone dismissive. "He's been trying to quit for years. Carries that lighter everywhere. It was his father's. It smells like accelerant, not lighter fluid. I know the difference. You know the difference." Alex's voice went cold. "You, who ran into one burning building and now sees arsonists in every shadow. You've been here 2 weeks, Miss Marino. Marco has been with me for 15 years. He was at my wedding. He held Luca the day he was born. He took a bullet meant for me in 2019. The words hit like physical blows, but Loretta stood her ground. "That doesn't mean... It means you don't know what you're talking about." Alex stood, and the movement was controlled fury. He came around the desk, and suddenly the office felt much smaller. "You think you can walk into my house, into my life, and start pointing fingers at the people who've bled for me? At the man who's protected my son since before you knew he existed? I'm trying to protect your son now." Loretta's voice rose despite her best efforts to stay calm. "Someone tried to kill him. You said that yourself. And I'm telling you, I found evidence. You found a lighter." Alex was close now, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his storm cloud eyes, could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that probably cost more than her monthly salary. "Do you have any idea how many people carry lighters? How many legitimate reasons there could be for trace chemicals? Then test it, or have it analyzed. I'm not going to waste resources investigating my most trusted man because the help got spooked doing laundry." The words were calculated cruelty, designed to put her in her place. They worked. Loretta felt the sting of them, the reminder that no matter how much Luca liked her, no matter how many cookies they baked together, she was still just the waitress Alex had bought to keep his son happy. "Fine." She turned to leave, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "When something happens, and it will happen, remember that I tried to warn you." "Is that a threat, Miss Marino?" She spun back to face him. "It's a promise. You're so busy trusting the wrong people that you can't see what's right in front of you. Marco had access. Marco knew where Luca was. Marco would die for my son." Alex's voice was deadly quiet now, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. "Can you say the same?" "I already almost did." The words exploded out of her, raw and furious. "I ran into fire for a child I'd never met. I breathed smoke and burned my skin and collapsed because I couldn't let him die. So yes, I can say the same. What I can't say is whether you'll believe me before it's too late." The air between them crackled with something that wasn't entirely anger. "You don't understand the world I live in," Alex said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "Everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle. People don't just run into burning buildings out of the goodness of their hearts." "I did." "Why?" He moved closer, and now there were only inches between them. "Why would you risk your life for a stranger's child? What were you hoping to gain?" Loretta's laugh was bitter. Hoping to gain. I was hoping not to have to live with watching a kid die because I was too scared to act. I was hoping not to become one of those people filming instead of helping. I was hoping... Her voice cracked. I was hoping to do one good thing in a world that feels like it's burning down around us every single day. Alex stared at her, and something in his expression shifted. The armor cracked, just slightly, just enough for her to see the exhaustion beneath it. The fear, the crushing weight of keeping his son alive in a world that wanted him dead. You think I don't know Marco's capable of betrayal? Alex's voice was quiet now, almost defeated. You think I don't lie awake every night wondering which of my men will be the one to put a bullet in my head? I know what I am, Miss Marino. I know what I've built. But I have to trust someone, or I might as well put Luca in a bunker and never let him see daylight again. Then trust me. Loretta held his gaze. Just this once. Look into it. Please. They stood there in the dim office, close enough to touch, the tension between them transforming into something neither of them wanted to name. Alex's eyes dropped to her mouth, then back up, and Loretta saw him consciously step back, putting distance between them like it physically hurt. I'll have someone look into it, he said finally. Quietly. But if you're wrong, if you've damaged my relationship with one of my best men over nothing, there will be consequences. And if I'm right, Alex's expression went dark. Then Marco won't live long enough to regret it. He moved back to his desk, effectively dismissing her. But as Loretta reached the door, his voice stopped her. Miss Marino. She turned. You were right. About the therapy. About the cookies. About what Luca needs. He wasn't looking at her, his attention fixed on the papers scattered across his desk. Don't make me regret trusting you about this too. It wasn't an apology. Men like Alessandro Esposito didn't apologize. But it was something. Loretta left him there, her heart still racing, her skin still tingling from standing so close to him. She made it halfway down the hallway before she had to stop and lean against the wall, pressing her palms flat against the cool surface. That tension in the office hadn't just been about Marco, or the lighter, or trust. That had been something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something that could burn them both worse than any fire. Loretta pushed off the wall and headed back to her room, but she knew she wouldn't sleep. Not tonight. Not with the memory of Alex's eyes on her mouth. Not with the knowledge that the enemy was close and getting closer. The fortress walls were strong, but they couldn't protect against what was already inside. And she wasn't sure anymore which threat scared her more. Marco's lighter, or the way her pulse had jumped when Alex had stepped close enough for her to count his heartbeats. Alex left at dawn. Loretta heard his car pull out of the circular drive from her bedroom window, watched the tail lights disappear through the iron gates. He'd mentioned the meeting the night before, something about territory disputes and negotiations that required his physical presence. He'd be gone until late evening, maybe longer. Marco was driving him. That detail had made Loretta's stomach clench, but Alex had dismissed her concerns with a look that said the conversation was over. Whatever quiet investigation he'd promised hadn't yielded results, or maybe he'd never actually started one. Either way, he trusted Marco enough to put his life in the man's hands for a 6-hour round trip. Loretta had spent the night memorizing the guard rotations, the camera blind spots, the rhythms of the house. If Marco was going to make a move, it would be today, while Alex was gone and the fortress's king was away from his castle. She kept Luca close all morning. They made breakfast together, French toast with strawberries, Luca's favorite. They worked on a painting project in his room, his small hands covered in blue and gold tempera. She taught him a card game her mother had taught her, and his laugh echoed through the colorful chaos of his space like music. It was almost noon when the lights went out. Not gradually. Not like a blown fuse or a tripped breaker. Every light in the house died simultaneously, plunging them into the grey dimness of a cloudy day filtered through windows. The ever-present hum of electronics, security systems, computers, cameras, went silent. Luca looked up from his cards, confused. What happened? Loretta was already moving toward the door. Stay here. I'm going to check. The door opened before she reached it. Marco stood in the hallway, and the pleasant expression he usually wore had been replaced by something else entirely. Something cold and purposeful. He held a gun in one hand, casual and competent, like it was an extension of his body. Step away from the boy, he said. Loretta's mind raced through options, calculating distances and probabilities. She was between Marco and Luca, but that advantage meant nothing against a bullet. The panic button Alex had shown her, the one that would summon every guard on the property, required electricity. The cameras were dead. The hallway was empty because Marco had chosen his timing perfectly during the shift change when coverage was thinnest. You don't have to do this, Loretta said, her voice steadier than she felt. But whatever they're paying you, you don't know anything about what I have to do. Marco moved into the room, and Loretta noticed he was wearing gloves. No fingerprints, no evidence. You should have minded your own business, should have just kept making cookies and playing house, but you had to go digging. Behind her, she heard Luca's wheelchair move, heard his small voice say, "Loretta? It's okay, sweetheart." She didn't dare turn around, didn't dare take her eyes off Marco. Everything's going to be okay. Touching. Marco's smile was a razor blade. Really? But I've got a schedule to keep. You can make this easy or hard, Miss Marino. Your choice. Loretta lunged for the art table, grabbing the scissors they'd been using to cut paper. It was a pathetic weapon against a gun. But it was something. She turned. Thus putting herself fully between Marco and Luca, the scissors held out like a knife. You'll have to go through me. Yeah, Marco said. I figured. He moved faster than she expected, closing the distance in 2 strides. Loretta slashed with the scissors, felt them connect with his forearm, saw blood bloom through his shirt. Marco cursed and backhanded her with the gun, the metal connecting with her temple in an explosion of white pain. Loretta hit the floor hard, her vision swimming. She tried to get up, tried to move, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Luca screaming, heard the sound of his wheelchair being grabbed. No! She managed to push herself to her knees, tasted blood in her mouth. Marco was already at the door, Luca thrashing in his arms. The boy was stronger than he looked, so fighting with everything he had, his fists connecting with Marco's face and chest. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Loretta! Luca's scream was raw terror. She tried to stand, but Marco turned and kicked her in the ribs. The air left her lungs in a rush, and she collapsed, gasping. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was Luca's face over Marco's shoulder, tears streaming down his cheeks, his mouth forming her name. Then nothing. Loretta woke to absolute darkness and the smell of motor oil. Her head throbbed where Marco had hit her, and her ribs screamed with every breath. She tried to move and realized her hands were zip-tied behind her back, ankles bound together. The surface beneath her was rough carpet, vibrating with the rhythm of movement. A trunk. She was in the trunk of a car. The panic clawed at her throat, but she forced it down, forced herself to think. How long had she been unconscious? Where was Luca? The car was moving, which meant they were already away from the estate, already beyond the reach of Alex's guards. She tested the zip ties, twisting her wrists. Too tight. The plastic bit into her skin, and she felt the wet warmth of blood. Her fingers searched the trunk's carpet, looking for anything. A tool, a latch, a weapon. Nothing. The car hit a pothole, and Loretta's head bounced against the trunk floor, sending fresh sparks of pain through her skull. She bit back a scream and kept searching, her fingers finally finding the emergency release handle that all modern cars were required to have. She pulled. Nothing happened. Marco had disabled it. Of course he had. But he'd probably disabled everything. The GPS, the OnStar, any system that could track the vehicle. He'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months, waiting for the perfect opportunity. And she'd given it to him by warning Alex, by making Marco aware that she knew. The car slowed, turned, the quality of the road changed, smooth pavement giving way to something rougher. Gravel? Dirt? They were leaving the main roads, heading somewhere remote. Somewhere no one would hear screams or see smoke. Loretta's heart hammered against her cracked ribs. She thought about Luca, terrified and alone with a man who'd already tried to kill him once. She thought about Alex, hours away, trusting the wrong person while everything he loved burned. She thought about the fire that had started all of this, or the heat and smoke and the choice she'd made to run toward danger instead of away from it. The car stopped. Loretta held her breath, listening. A door opened and closed. Footsteps on gravel, coming closer. The trunk latch clicked, and light flooded in, grey and overcast, but blinding after the absolute darkness. Marco's face appeared above her, and he was smiling. "Welcome back, Miss Marino. I was worried I'd hit you too hard." He reached in and grabbed her by the arm, hauling her out of the trunk with no regard for her injured ribs. She bit back a scream as her feet hit the ground, her bound ankles unable to support her weight. She was at an industrial complex, old, abandoned, the kind of place that had been left to rot when the jobs moved overseas. Rusted metal buildings stretched across a cracked parking lot, overgrown with weeds. In the distance, she could see the skeletal remains of a smokestack, and in Marco's other hand, held like a suitcase, was Luca's wheelchair. Empty. "Where is he?" Loretta's voice came out hoarse, desperate. Marco's smile widened. "Waiting for you. Both of you are going to help me send Mr. Esposito a very important message." He pulled something from his pocket, the Zippo lighter with the wolf's head engraving. "Some fires," he said, flipping it open, "are meant to burn everything to ash." The smell of accelerant filled the air, and Loretta understood with crystalline clarity that she wasn't going to walk away from this. Neither was Luca, unless she found a way to become fire herself. Marco dragged Loretta across the cracked parking lot toward the largest building, a steel mill that hadn't operated in decades, but the main doors hung open like a mouth, revealing darkness beyond. Her bound feet scraped against gravel and broken glass, leaving a trail of blood that no one would ever follow. Inside, the mill was a cathedral of decay. Massive machinery loomed in the shadows, conveyor systems, furnaces, industrial equipment that had been stripped of anything valuable and left to rust. Pigeons scattered from the rafters as Marco hauled her deeper into the building, their wings beating against the silence like 100 tiny heartbeats. Then she saw him. Luca sat in his wheelchair in the center of the floor, his small body dwarfed by the industrial wasteland around him. His face was streaked with tears, but his eyes burned with the same defiance she'd seen in his father. He wasn't screaming anymore. He'd gone silent, shutting down the way he had after the bombing, retreating to that place where words couldn't reach him. "Luca!" Loretta's voice echoed off the metal walls. The boy's head snapped up, and relief flooded his features. "Loretta!" "Touching reunion." Marco shoved Loretta down beside the wheelchair, and she fell hard on her already injured ribs. Pain whited out her vision for a moment. The nanny dies trying to save the crippled kid. Very tragic, very heroic. Mr. Esposito will probably put up a statue. Loretta's hands were still zip-tied behind her back, but her fingers found Luca's through the wheelchair spokes. His small hand gripped hers with desperate strength. "You won't get away with this," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Alex will know it was you." "Will he?" Marco pulled out a canister, industrial accelerant, the professional grade used in controlled demolitions. He began splashing it in a wide circle around them, the chemical smell overwhelming in the enclosed space. Or will he think it was the Calabrese family, finally making their move? I've been very careful to leave their fingerprints all over this. The car I borrowed, the accelerant I purchased, even the location. This mill used to be their territory. He was creating a frame, a perfect, plausible story that would send Alex to war with the wrong enemy while Marco disappeared with whatever payment had bought his betrayal. "Why?" Luca's voice was small, broken. "I thought you were my friend." Something flickered across Marco's face. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of the man he'd been before money had mattered more than loyalty. "Nothing personal, kid. But your father made a lot of enemies. Now someone was going to collect eventually. I just made sure I got paid to look the other way." He pulled out the Zippo lighter, the wolf's head catching the dim light filtering through the broken windows. Loretta's mind raced through possibilities, through the slim chances of survival. The zip ties were plastic, tight enough to cut off circulation. The accelerant made a complete circle around them. Once Marco lit it, they'd have seconds before the fire became an inferno. But Marco was talking. Villains always talked, buying time while they savored their victory. And while he talked, Loretta was working her wrists against the plastic, feeling for any weakness, any give. "The Calabrese family offered me $2 million, Marco said, circling them like a shark. $2 million to make sure the Esposito heir didn't make it to adulthood. They wanted it to look natural at first, an accident, a tragedy. But you survived that fire, kid. And when the pretty waitress started asking questions, I knew I had to accelerate the timeline." Loretta felt the zip tie shift. Her wrists were slick with blood, and the plastic was beginning to give. Just a little more. "Alex trusted you," she said, keeping Marco's attention on her while she worked. "He would have died for you. And that's why it was so easy." Marco smiled. "Trust is a weakness in our world, Miss Marino. Mr. Esposito forgot that. I'm just here to remind him." He flicked open the Zippo. Loretta felt the zip tie snap. Everything happened at once. Marco touched the lighter to the accelerant. Flames erupted in a circle, racing around them with hungry speed. Loretta's hands came free, and she grabbed Luca, hauling him out of the wheelchair just as the fire reached it. The chair ignited like a torch, plastic and fabric and foam burning with toxic black smoke. "Run!" Loretta screamed, but Luca's legs were useless. She lifted him, her ribs screaming in protest, and stumbled away from the flames. But Marco had planned well. The fire circle was complete, trapping them in a shrinking space as the flames spread to the oil-soaked machinery, climbing the walls, racing toward the rafters. The heat was immediate and overwhelming, stealing the oxygen from the air. Loretta remembered this feeling, this suffocating pressure, from the brownstone. But this time there was no door to crash through, no firefighters coming to save them. This time they were going to burn. Then Loretta saw it, a red box on the far wall, barely visible through the smoke. A fire suppression system, probably ancient and possibly defunct, but maybe still functional. "Hold on to me," she told Luca, and felt his arms lock around her neck. She ran toward the wall, through smoke and heat that seared her lungs. The flames were spreading faster now, feeding on decades of accumulated oil and debris. She couldn't see Marco anymore, couldn't hear anything over the roar of the fire. Her hand found the box. She ripped it open and pulled the lever. For a terrible second, nothing happened. Then the sprinklers erupted. Water cascaded from the ceiling in a torrential downpour, hitting the flames with explosive force. Steam filled the air, scalding and dense, but the fire began to retreat, hissing its rage. Loretta collapsed against the wall, Luca still clutched in her arms, both of them soaked and shaking. Through the steam, she saw Marco, his face twisted with fury. He had a gun, of course he had a gun, raising it towards them. Loretta turned, tried to shield Luca with her body. The shot never came. Instead, another sound cut through the chaos, the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle. Marco's body jerked, his eyes going wide with shock. He looked down at the bloom of red spreading across his chest, then crumpled to the wet floor. Through the steam and smoke, Alex Esposito emerged like an avenging angel. He held the rifle with professional competence, his expensive suit ruined by water and ash. Behind him, a team of men fanned out, securing the building with military precision. But Alex only had eyes for his son. "Luca!" He crossed the space in seconds, dropping to his knees beside them. His hands ran over Luca, checking for injuries with a desperation that shattered his carefully maintained control. "Are you hurt? Did he—" "I'm okay, Papa." Luca's voice was small but strong. "Loretta saved me. Again." Alex's eyes finally met Loretta's, and what she saw there stole her breath more completely than any smoke. Relief and rage and something else, something that burned hotter than the dying flames around them. "You were right," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "About Marco, about everything. I should have listened. I should have—" "You're here now," Loretta interrupted, because anything else he said would break them both. "That's what matters." Alex reached out and pulled her close. Luca caught between them, the three of them kneeling in the water and ash of the ruined mill. His forehead pressed against hers, and she felt him shaking, this man who'd built an empire on violence and fear, trembling like a child. "I thought I'd lost him," Alex whispered. "I thought I'd lost you both." The admission hung in the steaming air, more dangerous than any fire, more devastating than any betrayal, because in that moment, Loretta understood what she'd been trying not to see for weeks. She hadn't just saved his son. She'd claimed his heart, and in this world of ashes and violence, that might be the most dangerous thing of all. 6 months later, the fortress didn't feel like a fortress anymore. Loretta noticed it in small ways first, the way sunlight seemed to reach corners that had been dark before, the way laughter echoed through hallways that had only known silence. Mrs. Chen hummed while she worked now, and the guards smiled when Luca wheeled past them, his chair decorated with stickers he'd applied himself in a riot of color and chaos. The house had learned to breathe. Luca was the most visible change. He'd started physical therapy again, but with a new therapist who understood that progress didn't always look like medical textbooks said it should. He was speaking in full sentences now, telling elaborate stories about dragons and knights and waitresses who ran into burning buildings. His room had expanded into the adjacent space, filled with art supplies and adaptive equipment and the beautiful mess of a childhood reclaimed. But the biggest change was Alex. He still wore the expensive suits, still carried himself with that controlled power that made grown men step aside. But the ice in his eyes had thawed, or replaced by something warmer, something almost human. He'd stepped back from the family business, as he called it, delegating the violence to others while he focused on the legitimate enterprises that had always existed in the shadows of his empire. Real estate, import-export, investments that didn't require blood to turn a profit. He was trying to become the kind of man who deserved the life his son was building. The kind of man who deserved her. Loretta found him in the garden on a Sunday afternoon in early autumn. She'd been looking for Luca and discovered instead Alex kneeling by the rose beds, his sleeves rolled up, dirt under his fingernails. The tattoos on his forearms were fully visible in the golden light. All those saints and sinners, the visual history of a man trying to find redemption. "This is new," Loretta said, and he looked up with a smile that still had the power to stop her heart. Luca wanted a butterfly garden. Apparently, they need specific flowers. Alex gestured at the freshly turned earth, the careful arrangement of milkweed and coneflowers. "I've killed men for less than what these plants are costing me, but my son wants butterflies, so I'm learning about pollination." Loretta laughed, the sound carrying across the manicured lawn. Alessandro Esposito, mob boss turned gardener. The tabloids would have a field day. Former mob boss. He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "I'm a legitimate businessman now. Ask my accountant." "Your accountant is terrified of you." "As he should be. I pay him very well to be terrified." Alex's expression softened as he looked at her, and Loretta felt the familiar flutter in her chest that had become constant over the past months. They'd been dancing around this thing between them, this attraction that had started in anger and evolved into something neither of them quite knew how to name. They hadn't acted on it. Not with Luca to consider, not with the weight of everything that had happened still fresh. But it was there, constant and patient, waiting for the right moment. "Walk with me," Alex said, and offered his hand. They walked through the garden, past the fountain, where goldfish now swam in water that caught the afternoon sun like liquid gold. Past the bench where Luca liked to read, decorated with the cushions Loretta had chosen because the estate needed color, needed softness, needed proof that beauty could exist without coldness. Alex stopped at a small clearing where a new tree had been planted, a Japanese maple, its leaves already turning crimson with the season. "I planted this the day after the mill," Alex said quietly. "A life for a life. My accountant thinks I'm losing my mind, spending money on therapy and trees instead of territory. But I'm tired, Loretta. Tired of building empires on ash. Tired of being the monster in my son's bedtime stories." Turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression was more devastating than any weapon. "You walked through fire for us. Twice. You didn't ask what we could give you, or what you would gain. You just ran toward the flames because that's who you are." His hand reached up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I want to be the kind of man who deserves that. The kind of man who would walk through anything for you." Loretta's breath caught. "Alex, I'm not good at this," he continued, and she heard the frustration in his voice, the struggle of a man more comfortable with violence than vulnerability. "I don't know how to be soft or safe or any of the things you probably deserve. But I know that when I thought Marco had killed you, something in me broke that I didn't know could break. And I know that Luca lights up when you walk into a room in a way he never did before you came into our lives." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, Loretta's eyes burned with sudden tears. The ring was stunning, a ruby surrounded by diamonds, the stone the deep red of fire and passion and blood. It caught the light like a living thing, that like all the flames they'd survived distilled into something beautiful. "I'm not asking you to marry a mob boss," Alex said, dropping to one knee in the dirt of his butterfly garden. This man who'd ruled an empire, now kneeling before a waitress who dared to save his son. I'm asking you to marry a father who's trying to do better, a man who's learning about butterflies and therapy, and how to be someone his family doesn't have to fear. Marry me, Loretta. Walk through life with me, and I promise I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of the woman who ran into fire for us." Tears spilled down Loretta's cheeks as she dropped to her knees in front of him, taking his scarred, tattooed hands in hers. Yes. Yes, of course, yes. The kiss was soft at first, tentative. They're two people learning the shape of something new and precious and hard-won. Then it deepened, became something fierce and claiming, a promise sealed in the garden where butterflies would soon dance, and a man was learning to grow things instead of burn them. "I love you," Alex whispered against her lips. "I didn't think I was capable of it anymore, but you made me remember." "I love you too," Loretta said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. "My beautiful, broken king." Luca found them there 20 minutes later, still kneeling in the dirt, the ruby on Loretta's finger catching fire in the fading light. "Does this mean Loretta's staying forever?" he asked, and the hope in his voice was almost painful in its innocence. "Forever," Alex confirmed, and Loretta saw tears in his eyes, this man who'd built his reputation on never showing weakness, crying in front of his son because happiness was more terrifying than any threat. Luca wheeled closer and threw his arms around both of them, and they stayed like that as the sun set over the estate. Three people who'd found each other in fire and chosen to build something better in the ashes. Because sometimes, Loretta thought, salvation doesn't look like perfection. Sometimes it looks like a mob boss learning to garden, a traumatized boy learning to speak, and a waitress learning that running toward danger can lead to the safest place of all home. The world would still be complicated. Alex's past would still cast long shadows. There would be challenges ahead, negotiations between legitimate business and the life he was leaving behind. But they would face it together, this family forged in flames. And maybe that was the truest lesson, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to love despite it. That heroism wasn't about being fearless, but about being afraid and running toward the fire anyway. That redemption was possible, even for men with blood on their hands and saints and sinners tattooed on their skin. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stay, was fight, was believe that even in a world burning down around you, you could build something worth saving. Loretta had run into fire to save a stranger's child. She'd walked out with a family. And that, she thought as Alex's arms tightened around her, was a story worth telling. If this story of courage, redemption, and unexpected love moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories, and comment below telling us what moment touched your heart the most. Was it Loretta's first rescue? The confrontation in Alex's office? Or the proposal in the butterfly garden? We love hearing from you, and your support helps us bring you more stories that remind us all that even in the darkest moments, hope can still ignite. Until next time, keep running toward the light.